Good evening, folks. Tonight we want to move ahead with our study on the third generation of Scripture. And for sake of recap, we're going to just take a look at what we've touched on so far. So far we understand that from Romans chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, that the law was written in man's heart. Our conscience bear record and either accused us and or excused us of good and or of evil. So, by the time the written law is given to us in tables of stone by God, Moses was used by God, remember, at the foot of the mount, and he copied that document, and the oral giving of that law was given by God in the mount. That written document was agreed to, and not only was it agreed to, but the people entered into a covenant, and it was a covenant that was based on blood being shed and sprinkled on that document. If you remember, he went back up into the mount, and God delivered unto Moses the tables of stone. Those tables of stone were then brought down from the mount, and if you remember, the people of Israel were occupied with sin, and Moses smashed those original documents at the foot of the mount. This is setting a precedence with respect to the inspiration and preservation of Scripture. That document had served its purpose. And so in Deuteronomy chapter 10, God tells Moses to hew him 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and God would then rewrite those tables, and then later on those tables were to be put into the ark. So the first document was a hand-scribed document, the first document was the tables of stone, I should say, rather, that was written, had already existed long before. Moses simply just retrieved that document, and that original document was smashed at the foot of the mount. But Moses' document that he writes at the foot of the mount, that's agreed to and sprinkled in blood, is a second generation, and takes in consideration that there's elements to this document that did not exist previously. Namely, that people heard the oral law in the mount. Moses copied that oral law. So that copying process is a vindication of the approval on God's part to accept that what Moses writes is approved by God. It's not only copied, it's agreed to, and the blood of the covenant is sprinkled on it. That concludes document number 2. We all know, obviously, that Moses went beyond in his 40-year tenure and accumulated volumes of work that were actually started to be written in Exodus chapter 17 when the Amalekites were at battle with the children of Israel, and God noted that they were to write and chronicle these wars in a book. This went on over time through to the point where Moses, near the end of his tenure in Deuteronomy chapter 31, states that this document that he's concluding is to be put into the Ark of the Covenant. Now, when Joshua comes into the land, there was a charge by God written in Deuteronomy chapter 27 related to the law to be written on plastered stones. That was fulfilled by Joshua when he came into the land. In addition to that, if you remember, in Deuteronomy chapter 17, God commanded the kings to write them a copy of the law, which was before the priests in the plural. When they came into the land, if you remember, that corresponded very closely to the Passover. This Passover was in March, April, because the Jews had a staggered calendar because they only had a 30-day calendar month. So they would put a additional month every 6 years to compensate for that 30-day time period to bring them back into the cycle again. Well, during that Passover time, which is a half-year separation from the Feast of Tabernacles, which was the only time permitted by anyone of the high priest to go into the ark and to retrieve the original documents that were both written in stone and the documents that Moses would have charged that they put into the Ark of the Covenant. So no high priest had access to that. Joshua was not of the priestly order. He was of the tribe of Ephraim, which excluded him to have direct access to the original documents. That tells me that Joshua at least had a copy and copied a copy. This sets a precedence. Again, repeated. The copying process is an essential process on God's part to verify that the document that preceded it is approved. So, the entire volume of Moses' book was both in the Ark of the Covenant, and multiple copies had to be given to these scribes so that they could in turn replicate the teaching process through the people and eventually hand scribe more copies. Over time, and that incidentally does complete the third generation. Over time, obviously, God was not complete in the revelation process. We will look in the next session at generation 4, where another copy was made by Hezekiah's men in Proverbs chapter 25, and those letters are Solomon's writings. When Hezekiah's men copies that document or documents, it's noted in that first verse of Proverbs 25:1 that God permits Hezekiah's men to copy this book, and it's inserted, added, extra text into that volume of text, showing that God approves of that copying process. And we'll see that this continues to go on through the course of the generations. So we'll stop it at there, and we'll pick it up with the fourth generation on the next video. And I thank you for your time tonight.